Truth survives only where silence reigns. Kings feared secrets more than death, yet their greatest enigmas still breathe through shattered temples, cursed names, impossible rituals, hidden tombs, whispering relics awaiting anyone daring enough to witness ancient Egypt's darkest truths awakening tonight, forever unchanged inside memory alone, first always watching silently. Morning light settles gently over the abandoned city of Amarna, illuminating rows of broken walls, weathered statues, and fragments of inscriptions scattered across the desert floor. The silence is striking. Once, this place echoed with the voices of priests, officials, and the royal family of Egypt. Today, only the wind moves through the ruins, carrying with it questions that have lingered for more than 3,000 years. Among them is one of the greatest mysteries of the 18th dynasty. Who was Smenkhkare? Unlike famous rulers whose monuments dominate the landscape, Smenkhkare appears only briefly in the historical record. His name survives on a handful of inscriptions, carved stones, and damaged artifacts, yet these fragments offer remarkably little certainty. He possessed the titles of a pharaoh, suggesting that he ruled Egypt, but for how long and under what circumstances remains uncertain. Many historians believe Smenkhkare shared power with Akhenaten during the final years of his reign. Egypt was undergoing extraordinary change. Akhenaten had abandoned traditional religious practices, established the city of Amarna, and centered worship on the Aten. Political tensions were growing, and a co-ruler may have offered stability during an uncertain transition. Yet, no surviving document clearly explains their relationship. Even Smenkhkare's place within the royal family is unknown. Was he Akhenaten's younger brother, a son, another close relative chosen to inherit the throne? Every possibility has supporting evidence, but none answers every question. The destruction of many Amarna monuments after the restoration of Egypt's traditional religion erased countless clues that might once have resolved the mystery. The puzzle becomes even more complex when the name Nefertiti enters the story. Some scholars believe this was an entirely separate ruler, possibly Queen Nefertiti governing as pharaoh after Akhenaten's death. Others suggest that Nefertiti and Smenkhkare may represent overlapping royal identities recorded differently in surviving inscriptions. Because so many monuments were altered or deliberately erased, the evidence remains frustratingly incomplete. A few researchers have proposed more unusual ideas. Could Smenkhkare have ruled only ceremonially, existing as a symbolic king during a political crisis? Was his reign intentionally removed from official records by later pharaohs eager to distance themselves from the religious revolution at Amarna? Others wonder whether undiscovered tombs or hidden archives beneath the cliffs still contain inscriptions capable of revealing his true identity. These possibilities remain speculative, yet they continue to attract attention because the historical silence is so profound. After Smenkhkare disappeared, Tutankhamun rose to the throne. The royal court left Amarna, and Egypt gradually returned to its ancient traditions. In the process, the memory of an almost forgotten king faded into obscurity. Whether Smenkhkare was a powerful ruler, a reluctant successor, or someone whose identity has been misunderstood for centuries, the evidence refuses to tell a complete story. Perhaps, somewhere beneath the sands of Amarna, another fragment still waits, one that could finally answer a question that has endured since the age of the pharaohs. If the mystery of Smenkhkare leaves us searching for a forgotten king, the story that follows shifts our attention to a desperate message, one that crossed borders, challenged centuries of royal tradition, and may have altered the course of Egyptian history forever. Far beyond the limestone cliffs of Amarna, Deep within the archives of the ancient Hittite capital of Hattusa, clay tablets lay buried for centuries beneath collapsed walls. Pressed into their surfaces are lines of cuneiform writing that preserve an extraordinary diplomatic exchange. Unlike grand temple inscriptions carved for eternity, these records were never intended to inspire future generations. They were practical documents written during a time of uncertainty. Yet, among them survives one of the most remarkable letters in the history of the ancient world, a plea from an unnamed Egyptian queen known only by a title, Dakhamunzu. According to the Hittite records, the queen wrote after the death of her husband, the king of Egypt. Her message was astonishing in both its honesty and its urgency. She claimed that she had no son to inherit the throne and begged the Hittite king, Suppiluliuma I, to send one of his own sons to become her husband and Egypt's next pharaoh. To the Hittites, the request seemed almost unbelievable. Never before had an Egyptian royal widow asked a foreign prince to claim the throne. Egypt regarded itself as one of the greatest powers of the ancient world, and royal marriages almost always reinforced that image. Egyptian princesses were rarely sent abroad, and foreign princes were almost never invited to rule Egypt. Suppiluliuma himself reportedly doubted the authenticity of the letter. Could it be a trap? Was someone attempting to lure a Hittite prince into enemy territory? Rather than responding immediately, the Hittite king dispatched envoys to verify the queen's claims. Their reports confirmed that the Egyptian king had indeed died, and that the queen remained without an heir. Convinced at last, Suppiluliuma agreed to the extraordinary request and selected one of his sons, Prince Zannanza, to travel south. He never arrived. Somewhere along the journey, Zannanza was killed before reaching Egypt. The circumstances remain unknown. The Hittite records express outrage, strongly implying that Egyptian forces or political rivals were responsible. His death nearly ignited open war between the two kingdoms, with Suppiluliuma blaming Egypt for murdering his son. But who was the mysterious queen who sent the letter? Most scholars believe Dakhamunzu was not a personal name, but a Hittite rendering of the Egyptian title Tehemet Nesu, meaning the king's wife. Identifying the woman behind that title has proven far more difficult. One widely accepted theory identifies her as Akhenaten, the widow of Tutankhamun. After the young pharaoh's unexpected death, she may have found herself surrounded by powerful officials competing for the throne. Without a surviving heir, inviting a foreign prince may have seemed like the only way to preserve both her position and the royal bloodline. Some support for this theory comes from the chronology of Tutankhamun's death and the political instability that followed. Others suggest the letter was written earlier, perhaps during the turbulent years following Akhenaten's reign. According to this interpretation, the queen could have been Nefertiti or another royal woman connected to the Amarna court. Because the chronology of this period remains uncertain, the evidence can be interpreted in more than one way, leaving room for competing reconstructions. The affair also raises deeper questions about Egypt itself. If the letter was genuine, just how unstable had the kingdom become? What crisis could have persuaded an Egyptian queen to seek help from a longtime rival? Was the request born of fear, political necessity, or an attempt to prevent civil conflict before it consumed the royal court? More speculative ideas have emerged over the years. Some researchers have wondered whether powerful officials within Egypt intercepted the prince to secure their own path to the throne. Others suggest the queen herself disappeared shortly afterward because she knew too much about the struggle for power unfolding around her. These possibilities remain unproven, resting largely on the silence left by missing records rather than on direct evidence. Today, the clay tablets of Hattusa remain among the most important witnesses to this remarkable episode. They preserve the voice of a queen whose identity has never been established with certainty, a prince whose journey ended before it truly began, and a diplomatic mission that collapsed into mystery. Across thousands of years, her plea still echoes through history, asking not only for a husband or a king, but leaving us to wonder whether the truth behind the Dakhamunzu Affair was buried with those who had every reason to keep it secret. If the Dakhamunzu Affair was sparked by a single desperate letter, its most haunting chapter unfolded far from the Egyptian court. Somewhere along an ancient road stretching between the Hittite Empire and the Nile Valley, a royal journey came to an abrupt and mysterious end. The prince who had been chosen to become Egypt's next king never reached his destination, and his death remains one of the most intriguing unsolved crimes of the ancient world. The rugged mountain passes of Anatolia gradually give way to open plains, river crossings, and long desert routes leading toward Egypt. Thousands of years ago, diplomats, merchants, soldiers, and royal envoys traveled these same paths under the constant threat of disease, bandits, and political betrayal. Somewhere along this vast network of roads, Prince Zannanza disappeared from history. No tomb has ever been identified. No contemporary Egyptian inscription describes his final days. His fate survives almost entirely through Hittite records, written by a grieving royal family convinced that murder, not misfortune, had ended his journey. According to the Hittite archives discovered at Hattusa, King Suppiluliuma I reluctantly agreed to send his son after receiving repeated assurances from the Egyptian queen known as Dakhamunzu. The prince was expected to marry the widowed queen and claim the throne of Egypt, an unprecedented diplomatic union between two rival powers. It was a decision filled with enormous political risk, yet also with extraordinary opportunity. Instead, news arrived that Zannanza had been killed before crossing into Egypt. The Hittite king reacted with fury. His records accused the Egyptians of responsibility, although they stopped short of identifying a specific individual. The prince's death transformed what might have become a historic alliance into a bitter diplomatic crisis. Military campaigns soon followed, and the relationship between the two kingdoms deteriorated sharply. But who actually benefited from Zannanza's death? One of the strongest historical possibilities points toward the fierce struggle for power inside Egypt itself. If the throne stood vacant after the death of its young king, several influential figures may have viewed a foreign prince as an unacceptable threat. A Hittite ruler would have disrupted established lines of succession, challenged powerful nobles, and potentially shifted Egypt's political balance overnight. Among the names frequently discussed is A, the elderly court official who eventually became Pharaoh. His rise to power occurred shortly after these events, leading some historians to wonder whether he had reason to prevent Zannanza from ever reaching Egypt. Yet, there is no direct evidence connecting A to the prince's death. The surviving records simply do not provide enough information to move beyond informed speculation. Another figure often considered is Horemheb, the military commander who would later seize the throne and restore traditional authority after the Amarna period. As commander of Egypt's armies, he possessed both influence and strategic interests. However, like A, no surviving inscription links him directly to the incident, leaving the theory impossible to confirm. Of course, not every explanation requires political assassination. The journey itself stretched across dangerous territory where hostile tribes, rival kingdoms, and ordinary criminals operated. Disease, accidental injury, or an attack unrelated to Egyptian politics could also explain the prince's disappearance. Ancient travel was unpredictable, and many important envoys never completed their missions. Yet, the timing continues to raise suspicion. The prince died precisely when his arrival threatened to reshape the Egyptian monarchy. For many historians, that coincidence is difficult to ignore. Was his death carefully planned by individuals determined to preserve their own ambitions? Or was it an unfortunate event that later generations interpreted through the lens of political conflict? More speculative theories venture even further. Some suggest the Queen's letter itself may have been part of a larger conspiracy intended to lure the Hittite prince into an ambush. Others imagine secret factions within the Egyptian court competing against one another, each willing to eliminate anyone who stood between them and the throne. These ideas remain unproven, supported more by the unusual circumstances than by surviving evidence. What makes the mystery so enduring is the silence surrounding the event. Egyptian records offer almost nothing. Hittite accounts tell only one side of the story. The place where Zannanza died has never been identified, and whatever witnesses once knew the truth disappeared more than 3,000 years ago. As Prince Zannanza's trail disappears into the silence of ancient roads, another absence emerges within Egypt itself, one that may be even more puzzling. This time, it is not a foreign prince who vanishes from the record, but one of the most recognizable women of the ancient world. For a queen whose face became an enduring symbol of Egypt, Nefertiti seems to disappear almost without explanation. The ruins of Amarna glow softly beneath the afternoon sun. Broken palace walls stretch across the desert, their painted plaster long faded by centuries of wind and heat. Fragments of carved reliefs still show scenes of an extraordinary royal family gathered beneath the rays of the Aten. Akhenaten stands beside his queen, Nefertiti, while their daughters play at their feet. These images present a partnership unlike almost any seen in earlier Egyptian art. Nefertiti appears not as a distant royal consort, but as an active participant in ceremonies, diplomacy, and religious rituals. Then, almost suddenly, she is gone. Few figures from ancient Egypt have inspired as much fascination as Queen Nefertiti. Her famous painted limestone bust, discovered in 1912, reveals remarkable artistry and has become one of the world's most recognizable ancient portraits. Yet, while her image survived with extraordinary clarity, the story of her final years remains frustratingly obscure. During the early years of Akhenaten's reign, Nefertiti occupied an exceptionally prominent position. In reliefs throughout Amarna, she is shown wearing the blue crown usually associated with kingship, striking enemies in ceremonial scenes, making offerings to the Aten, and standing beside the pharaoh in roles that suggest unusual authority. Some historians believe she exercised political influence far beyond that of earlier Egyptian queens. Then, the evidence changes. After approximately the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, references to Nefertiti become increasingly rare. Her name disappears from many inscriptions. New royal names begin appearing in damaged monuments, while existing reliefs are altered or left unfinished. Unlike other queens whose deaths were carefully recorded, Nefertiti simply fades from the surviving record. The most straightforward explanation is that she died during Akhenaten's reign, perhaps from illness or one of the epidemics that may have affected the royal court during the Amarna period. Ancient Egypt faced recurring outbreaks of disease, and several members of the royal family appear to have died within a relatively short span of time. If Nefertiti succumbed during this period, the absence of elaborate burial records may simply reflect the political upheaval surrounding the end of Akhenaten's rule. Yet another possibility has attracted increasing attention among Egyptologists. Rather than disappearing, Nefertiti may have continued ruling under a different royal identity. Several scholars propose that she became the mysterious pharaoh Nefertiti, adopting full kingship after Akhenaten's death or during his final years. Certain inscriptions seem to associate Nefertiti closely with Akhenaten, while also suggesting a ruler familiar with the royal household. The evidence is incomplete, but enough similarities exist to keep the theory alive. Others connect her disappearance with the equally mysterious figure of Smenkhkare. Did Nefertiti briefly govern alongside this elusive ruler? Were the two separate individuals, or do their identities overlap in ways that modern historians have yet to fully understand? The damaged inscriptions of Amarna refuse to provide simple answers. The search for Nefertiti's tomb has only deepened the mystery. Unlike the resting places of many royal figures from the 18th dynasty, her burial has never been identified with certainty. Some archaeologists have suggested that her tomb may still lie hidden somewhere within the cliffs surrounding Amarna. Others have proposed that undiscovered chambers near Tutankhamun's burial could conceal the remains of another royal figure, perhaps even Nefertiti herself. Extensive investigations have produced intriguing observations, but no conclusive proof, leaving the question open. More speculative theories reach further still. Some suggest that later rulers deliberately erased evidence of Nefertiti because of her association with Akhenaten's controversial religious revolution. Others imagine that her burial was intentionally concealed to protect it from political enemies or tomb robbers, hidden so successfully that it has escaped discovery for more than 3 millennia. While these ideas remain unverified, they continue to resonate because so much of the historical record from Amarna is fragmented or missing. Today, Nefertiti's face is instantly recognizable across the world, yet the final chapter of her life remains unwritten. Did she die quietly within the walls of Amarna? Did she ascend the throne under another name? Or does her undiscovered tomb still rest somewhere beneath the desert, preserving answers that have waited thousands of years for someone to uncover them? If Queen Nefertiti vanished into the shadows of history, the ruler who followed her generation left behind something very different, a tomb unlike any ever discovered. Yet, even though Tutankhamun's burial survived almost untouched, the young pharaoh's final days remain surrounded by questions that refuse to fade. Deep inside the Valley of the Kings, narrow corridors descend through solid rock toward a series of painted chambers sealed for more than 3,000 years. Golden shrines stand nested within one another like protective shells, while finely crafted furniture, ceremonial chariots, jewelry, and weapons fill every available space. At the center rests the famous gold coffin of Tutankhamun, a masterpiece of ancient craftsmanship that transformed modern understanding of Egypt. His treasures survived remarkably intact. His story, however, did not. Tutankhamun became pharaoh at around 9 years of age during one of the most unstable periods in Egyptian history. The religious revolution introduced by Akhenaten had fractured long-established traditions, and the kingdom was slowly returning to the worship of its ancient gods. Although Tutankhamun ruled in name, experienced advisors almost certainly guided many of the kingdom's most important decisions. Among them were the elderly court official and the powerful military commander Horemheb, both of whom would later play significant roles in Egypt's future. Then, at approximately 19 years of age, Tutankhamun died unexpectedly. The surviving records say almost nothing about the circumstances of his death. There is no detailed royal account, no official explanation, and no contemporary description of his final illness. Instead, historians have been forced to reconstruct the young king's last days using his mummy, archaeological evidence, and fragments of historical context. For many years, one theory dominated public imagination. Early examinations of the mummy appeared to identify damage near the back of the skull, leading some researchers to suggest that Tutankhamun had been murdered by a blow to the head. Combined with the rapid succession of to the throne, the possibility of political assassination seemed difficult to ignore. Popular books and documentaries embraced the idea of a conspiracy within the royal court, portraying the young king as the victim of an ambitious rival. Modern medical imaging, however, has complicated that picture. CT scans performed on the mummy revealed that much of the skull damage likely occurred during the mummification process or as a result of Howard Carter's excavation in the 20th century. The evidence for a fatal head injury became considerably weaker than once believed. Attention then shifted elsewhere. Examinations identified a severe fracture in Tutankhamun's left leg, occurring shortly before death. Some specialists believe this injury became infected, leading to complications that ancient medicine could not overcome. At the same time, DNA studies suggested that Tutankhamun suffered from malaria, a disease capable of becoming especially dangerous when combined with serious physical trauma. Rather than a single dramatic event, his death may have resulted from several overlapping health problems. The mummy also revealed evidence of congenital conditions, including abnormalities affecting his feet. Walking may have been painful throughout his life, possibly explaining the unusually large number of walking sticks found inside his tomb. These discoveries have encouraged some researchers to view Tutankhamun not as a healthy young warrior, but as a king living with chronic physical challenges. Yet, questions remain. How did the leg fracture occur? Some suggest a hunting accident or the overturning of a royal chariot. Others argue that his physical condition makes high-speed chariot racing unlikely. Without eyewitness accounts, the injury itself remains another mystery. The political circumstances surrounding his death continue to attract attention as well. Within a short time, I became pharaoh by marrying Tutankhamun's widow, Akhenaten. Soon afterward, Horemheb assumed the throne and initiated efforts to erase much of the Amarna period from official history. Was this simply the normal transfer of power during a time of crisis, or did events unfold according to a carefully arranged plan? More speculative theories continue to circulate. Some writers suggest poison, secret court conspiracies, or deliberate manipulation of the succession. Others believe important records describing the young king's final days were intentionally destroyed, as later rulers reshaped Egypt's historical narrative. None of these ideas has been confirmed, yet they persist because the available evidence leaves critical gaps. Today, Tutankhamun is remembered as Egypt's most famous pharaoh, not because of military victories or monumental achievements, but because his tomb survived where so many others were plundered. Ironically, the king whose burial preserved thousands of priceless objects still keeps one of his greatest secrets. Did illness alone claim his life? Or was his death entwined with the dangerous politics of a kingdom struggling to redefine itself? Somewhere between the golden mask and the silent mummy, the answer may still be waiting. If the death of Tutankhamun reminds us how little we truly know about the final moments of a young king, the next mystery leads us into a far darker chapter of Egyptian history, one where surviving documents describe not rumor or legend, but an organized plot to overthrow a living pharaoh from within the walls of his own palace. The massive temple of Medinet Habu rises from the west bank of the Nile like a stone fortress. Its towering walls are covered with scenes of military victories, religious ceremonies, and the triumphant reign of Ramesses III, the last great warrior pharaoh of the New Kingdom. At first glance, the temple projects confidence and stability, yet hidden among Egypt's surviving papyri is evidence that, while these monuments celebrated strength, a deadly conspiracy was quietly unfolding behind the palace walls. By the reign of Ramesses III, Egypt was facing mounting challenges. Economic pressures were increasing, foreign threats continued along its borders, and internal dissatisfaction had begun to surface. Although the king had successfully defended Egypt against the Sea Peoples and other enemies, maintaining the vast kingdom demanded enormous resources. Behind the grandeur of the royal court, tensions were quietly growing. Within the secluded royal harem, a complex that housed the king's wives, children, attendants, and servants, a secret alliance began to form. The primary source for this remarkable episode is the judicial papyrus of Turin, one of the most detailed legal documents to survive from ancient Egypt. It records the investigation and trials that followed an attempt to overthrow the pharaoh. Unlike many royal inscriptions that emphasize victories and divine favor, this papyrus reveals political betrayal, secret meetings, magical practices, and carefully planned assassination. At the center of the conspiracy stood Queen Tiye, one of Ramesses III's secondary wives. According to the surviving records, she hoped to place her son, Prince Pentawer, on the throne instead of the designated heir. To accomplish this, she allegedly recruited palace officials, military personnel, servants, and administrators, creating a network that reached far beyond the royal household. The conspirators reportedly exchanged secret messages and coordinated their actions while avoiding suspicion. Some documents even describe the use of wax figurines and written spells intended to weaken the king and protect the plotters. Whether these magical rituals were viewed as symbolic acts or believed to possess genuine supernatural power, they reveal how deeply religion and politics were intertwined in ancient Egypt. For generations, historians debated whether the conspiracy actually succeeded. The judicial papyrus carefully describes the arrests and punishments handed down after the plot was uncovered, but it never clearly states whether Ramesses III survived the assassination attempt. This silence puzzled scholars for decades. If the king had escaped unharmed, why avoid saying so? If he had died, why conceal such a significant event? Modern technology eventually provided an important clue. CT scans performed on the mummy of Ramesses III revealed a deep wound across the throat, so severe that it almost certainly proved fatal. The injury had remained hidden beneath the wrappings for thousands of years. Further examination identified an amulet placed directly over the wound during mummification, perhaps in the hope that it would restore the king's body in the afterlife. The evidence strongly suggests that the assassination attempt described in the papyri may indeed have succeeded. Yet, many questions remain unanswered. Who actually delivered the fatal blow? Was it one of the named conspirators, a trusted palace official, or someone whose identity was never recorded? The surviving documents focus primarily on the trials rather than the attack itself, leaving the most crucial moments frustratingly incomplete. Prince Pentawer's fate is equally mysterious. The papyri indicate that he was found guilty and allowed to take his own life rather than face public execution. Some researchers have proposed that an unidentified mummy displaying signs of forced death could belong to the disgraced prince, although this identification remains uncertain. More speculative theories extend beyond the official record. Some suggest that the conspiracy involved far more individuals than those brought to trial, with influential figures escaping punishment to preserve political stability. Others wonder whether sections of the investigation were deliberately omitted before the papyri were archived, shielding powerful families from lasting disgrace. These ideas remain impossible to verify, but they continue to attract attention because even the surviving records leave noticeable gaps. The Harem conspiracy is one of the rare moments when ancient Egypt allows us to glimpse the dangerous realities hidden behind royal ceremony. It reveals a kingdom where ambition, loyalty, fear, and power collided within the palace itself. Even after thousands of years, the voice of the judicial papyrus and the silent testimony of Ramesses III's mummy leave us with an unsettling question. How many secrets of that deadly conspiracy were buried alongside those who ensured that only part of the story would ever be told? If the conspiracy against Ramesses III exposed the dangers that could unfold within the royal court, another chapter of Egyptian history presents a quieter mystery, one shaped not by a single violent act, but by an extraordinary ascent to power. Few individuals transformed their destiny as completely as Horemheb, a man who began his career outside the royal bloodline, yet ultimately became Pharaoh of Egypt. The first light of dawn washes over the colossal statues of Karnak, where towering columns rise like a forest of stone. Nearby, weathered inscriptions carved into temple walls still celebrate kings whose names have echoed through history for thousands of years. Among them appears Horemheb, depicted not as a prince born to inherit the throne, but as a disciplined military commander whose authority seemed to grow steadily during one of Egypt's most uncertain eras. Unlike many pharaohs, Horemheb was almost certainly not born into the royal family. His early life remains largely unknown, although inscriptions suggest he rose through the ranks of the Egyptian military, earning a reputation for leadership and administrative skill. During the closing years of the 18th dynasty, he became commander of Egypt's armies, serving while the kingdom struggled to recover from the upheaval of Akhenaten's religious revolution. By the time Tutankhamun occupied the throne, Horemheb had become one of the most influential men in Egypt. Official monuments describe him as a trusted servant of the king and guardian of order. Yet, despite his prominence, he never became Tutankhamun's immediate successor. Instead, after the young king's unexpected death, the throne passed to Ai, an elderly court official with deep connections to the royal household. Horemheb remained in the background, at least publicly. Then, only a few years later, Ai also disappeared from the historical record, and Horemheb emerged as pharaoh. The transition appears remarkably smooth. There are no surviving accounts of civil war, widespread rebellion, or open conflicts surrounding his accession. Yet, considering the fragile political climate of the time, many historians find this peaceful transfer intriguing. How did a military commander with no direct royal ancestry secure Egypt's highest office? The most widely accepted explanation is that Horemheb had already been designated as heir during Tutankhamun's reign. Some inscriptions suggest he held exceptional authority long before becoming king, perhaps positioning him as the kingdom's preferred successor should the royal line fail. If so, his eventual accession may have reflected careful political planning rather than sudden ambition. Even so, the evidence is incomplete. Questions also surround Horemheb's relationship with Ai. Did he willingly accept Ai's brief reign out of respect for established tradition? Or was he waiting patiently, knowing that time would eventually place the throne within his reach? No surviving document answers these questions directly. Once crowned, Horemheb acted decisively. He restored the authority of traditional temples, reorganized the government, strengthened legal administration, and attempted to erase much of the Amarna period from official memory. Monuments associated with Akhenaten, Smenkhkare, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, and even Ai were dismantled or altered. Their names disappeared from many king lists, creating historical gaps that continue to challenge modern Egyptologists. This deliberate rewriting of history has become one of the greatest obstacles to understanding the period. By removing his predecessors from official records, Horemheb may have strengthened his own legitimacy, but he also ensured that future generations would struggle to reconstruct the events that brought him to power. Some historians view these actions as practical rather than sinister. After decades of religious and political instability, Egypt needed continuity. Presenting himself as the rightful successor to the great rulers before Akhenaten may have helped reunify the kingdom and restore public confidence. Others see a more calculated strategy. Did Horemheb merely inherit a fractured kingdom, or did he actively shape the circumstances that allowed his rise? Some speculative theories suggest he quietly influenced events during the reigns of Tutankhamun and Ai, positioning himself carefully while avoiding direct confrontation. A few even wonder whether key political rivals disappeared under suspicious circumstances, although no convincing evidence supports such claims. These ideas remain speculative, emerging largely from the silence left by incomplete records rather than from documented facts. Ironically, Horemheb succeeded so thoroughly in restoring order that much of the evidence surrounding his own rise may have vanished with the history he chose to erase. His monuments celebrate justice, stability, and renewal, yet they reveal very little about the path that led him to the throne. Today, Horemheb stands as both a restorer and a mystery, a soldier who became king, a ruler who reshaped Egypt's future, and a man whose greatest achievement may also have concealed the truth of his own remarkable ascent. Somewhere beneath the polished inscriptions and carefully rewritten history, the full story of how Horemheb claimed the crown may still be waiting to be uncovered. If Horemheb's rise reminds us that history is often shaped by those who survive political turmoil, the next mystery takes us back to an even earlier age, when Egypt itself was divided, and one pharaoh met a death so violent that his wounds remain visible thousands of years later. Hidden within the royal cache at Deir el-Bahari, the mummy of Seqenenre II rests in quiet darkness. Unlike the peaceful faces of many Egyptian kings, his features tell a different story. His skull bears multiple devastating injuries, frozen in time by the careful work of ancient embalmers. Every fracture, every deep cut, every shattered bone seems to preserve the final moments of a battle that historians are still trying to reconstruct. Seqenenre II ruled during one of the most turbulent periods in Egyptian history, around the end of the Second Intermediate Period. At that time, northern Egypt was controlled by the Hyksos, a foreign dynasty that had established its capital at Avaris. Meanwhile, native Egyptian rulers governed the south from Thebes. For years, the country remained politically divided, with growing tensions between the two kingdoms. One of the most famous surviving texts from this era is the tale of the quarrel between Seqenenre II and the Hyksos king Apophis. According to the story, Apophis sent an almost absurd complaint to Thebes, claiming that the hippopotamuses kept by Seqenenre were disturbing his sleep hundreds of miles away. Most scholars interpret this account as symbolic rather than literal, a literary way of describing rising hostility between two rival courts. Whatever the true cause, conflict soon followed. The mystery begins with the king's body. When Seqenenre's mummy was first examined, researchers discovered several severe wounds to the head. There were crushing blows from an axe, deep cuts likely caused by bladed weapons, and fractures consistent with repeated attacks from different angles. Unlike ceremonial injuries or damage caused after death, these wounds appeared unmistakably violent. For many years, historians wondered whether the king had been assassinated while asleep inside his palace. The concentration of injuries on the head seemed to support the idea of a surprise attack. Perhaps traitors had entered the royal residence under cover of darkness, eliminating the pharaoh before he could defend himself. More recent studies, however, have painted a different picture. Detailed CT scans of the mummy suggest that Seqenenre's hands may have been restrained when he died, possibly tied behind his back. The pattern of wounds also matches several different Hyksos weapons recovered by archaeologists, including battle axes, spears, and daggers. Rather than a palace assassination, some researchers now believe the king may have been captured alive during combat and executed by multiple attackers. If this interpretation is correct, his death becomes even more remarkable. Instead of dying in secrecy, Seqenenre may have fallen while personally leading Egyptian forces against the Hyksos. Such an end would explain the respect later generations showed him. His sons, Kamose, and eventually Ahmose I continued the struggle, ultimately driving the Hyksos from Egypt and reunifying the kingdom. In that sense, Seqenenre's death may have become a powerful symbol of resistance and national renewal. Yet, certainty remains elusive. No surviving battlefield has been identified where the king met his end. Egyptian records describe the conflict only sparingly, while Hyksos accounts have largely disappeared. Without eyewitness testimony, the precise circumstances remain open to interpretation. Other possibilities continue to be discussed. Could Seqenenre have been wounded during battle but finished off after capture? Was he betrayed by someone within his own ranks before reaching the enemy? A handful of speculative theories even suggest that internal political rivalries in Thebes played a role, although no archaeological evidence currently supports these ideas. They persist largely because the surviving evidence leaves crucial moments unexplained. Even the condition of his mummy raises additional questions. Some specialists have noted signs suggesting that his body may not have been embalmed immediately after death, leading to speculation that recovering the fallen king from enemy territory may have taken time. If so, what happened between his death and his return to Thebes? Who risked their lives to retrieve their defeated ruler? Today, Seqenenre Tao II remains one of the few ancient pharaohs whose final moments are written directly upon his bones. His shattered skull tells a story of extraordinary violence, courage, and sacrifice, but not the complete truth. Somewhere between the battlefield, the palace, and the missing records of a divided Egypt lies the answer to one enduring question: who truly delivered the blows that ended the life of the king who helped begin Egypt's fight for freedom? If the battered remains of Seqenenre Tao II reveal the violence that accompanied Egypt's struggle against foreign rulers, another mystery takes us to a later dynasty, where the conflict may have come not from outside the kingdom, but from within. This time, the battlefield is hidden beneath erased inscriptions, damaged monuments, and rival royal names carved over one another in stone. The sandstone temples of Upper Egypt stand beneath a blazing sky, their walls layered with generations of carvings. At first glance, they appear unchanged, preserving the orderly succession of pharaohs. Yet, a closer inspection reveals something unusual. Certain royal cartouches have been carefully chiseled away. Others have been replaced with different names. These deliberate alterations are not the result of weather or time alone. They are the fingerprints of a political struggle whose true story has never been fully recovered. The mystery centers on two kings of the 19th dynasty, Seti II and Amenmesse. Seti II was the son of Pharaoh Merneptah, and, according to the traditional line of succession, the legitimate heir to the throne. His monuments appear across Egypt, presenting him as the rightful ruler chosen to continue the dynasty established by Ramesses the Great. Yet, during his reign, another king emerged with full royal titles, constructing monuments, issuing inscriptions, and exercising authority over parts of the kingdom. That ruler was Amenmesse. The surviving evidence suggests that Amenmesse controlled Upper Egypt for at least part of his reign, while Seti II maintained influence elsewhere. The exact chronology remains one of the most difficult puzzles in Egyptian history. Did Amenmesse seize the throne after Seti II briefly ruled? Did the two reign simultaneously, each claiming legitimacy? Or was Amenmesse recognized only in certain regions while Seti II continued to govern the rest of Egypt? The archaeological record offers conflicting answers. In several temples and tombs, the names of Seti II were replaced by those of Amenmesse. Later, those same inscriptions were altered again, restoring Seti II's royal identity and erasing Amenmesse almost completely. This sequence strongly suggests an intense political struggle rather than a peaceful transition of power. Many Egyptologists believe Amenmesse was a rival claimant, perhaps another son of Merneptah, or a close royal relative who challenged Seti II's authority. If so, Egypt may have experienced a period of internal division, with competing administrations controlling different territories. Such conflicts were rarely described openly in official inscriptions, making archaeology the primary source for reconstructing these events. Yet, surprisingly little evidence of large-scale warfare has been discovered. There are no surviving accounts describing decisive battles, widespread destruction, or major military campaigns between the rival kings. Instead, the struggle appears to have unfolded through political control, shifting loyalties, and symbolic acts such as replacing royal names on monuments. Was this a true civil war, or a prolonged contest for legitimacy carried out largely through administration and regional influence? One particularly intriguing clue comes from the royal tombs. Amenmesse prepared an elaborate burial in the Valley of the Kings, suggesting that he considered himself a fully legitimate pharaoh. Yet his tomb appears unfinished, and later alterations hint that it may have been abandoned or deliberately desecrated after his fall from power. His memory was systematically erased from many official records, making him another ruler whose existence survives only in scattered fragments. More speculative theories attempt to explain the silence surrounding the conflict. Some researchers have wondered whether Egypt's priesthood quietly supported one claimant over the other, influencing the balance of power behind the scenes. Others suggest that influential military commanders may have shifted their allegiance as political circumstances changed, allowing the struggle to end without a single decisive battle. These possibilities remain difficult to prove because so many records from the period were intentionally altered or destroyed. There is also the lingering question of Amenmesse's identity. Was he truly an ambitious usurper, or could later rulers have unfairly portrayed him as one after securing victory? History is often written by those who prevail, and in ancient Egypt, erasing a rival's name was one of the most powerful ways to reshape the past. By the end of the conflict, Seti II emerged as the recognized ruler, while Amenmesse faded into obscurity. The monuments were corrected, official king lists moved forward, and the appearance of stability returned. Yet, beneath the restored inscriptions lies the unmistakable evidence of a kingdom once divided against itself. Today, the weathered stones of Egypt still preserve faint traces of both kings, layered one upon another like competing memories refusing to disappear. Whether the struggle between Seti II and Amenmesse was a civil war, a regional rebellion, or a succession crisis unlike any other, its full story remains buried beneath centuries of deliberate erasure, waiting for the next discovery to reveal which king was truly defending the throne and which one believed it already belonged to him. If the struggle between Seti II and Amenmesse revealed how rival kings could divide Egypt, the closing years of the new kingdom present an even subtler mystery. This time, there was only one officially recognized pharaoh, yet growing evidence suggests that real authority may have rested in very different hands. At sunset, the towering columns of the Temple of Karnak cast long shadows across silent courtyards where priests once performed ceremonies that sustained the kingdom's spiritual life. Far to the south, in the sacred city of Thebes, temple walls still preserve the names of kings and high officials. But as the reign of Ramesses XI drew to its close, those inscriptions begin to tell an unusual story. The pharaoh's name remains, yet other figures gradually emerge beside it, men whose influence seems to rival, and perhaps even surpass, that of the king himself. Ramesses XI was the final ruler of the 20th dynasty, bringing nearly 5 centuries of New Kingdom rule toward its end. By the time he ascended the throne, Egypt had already endured decades of economic strain, foreign pressure, labor unrest, and administrative decline. The royal government that had once commanded vast territories now struggled to maintain authority across its own borders. Officially, Ramesses XI remained pharaoh of Upper and Lower Egypt. In practice, however, the kingdom appears to have become increasingly fragmented. One of the most powerful individuals of this period was the high priest of Amun, Herihor. Based in Thebes, Herihor gradually accumulated extraordinary authority. Temple inscriptions depict him wearing regalia traditionally associated with kingship. He commanded military forces, supervised religious institutions, managed vast economic resources, and issued monuments bearing his own titles. Although he did not openly replace Ramesses XI, his position suggests that southern Egypt functioned with remarkable independence. Meanwhile, in the north, another influential figure was rising. Smendes governed the Nile Delta from the city of Tanis, overseeing the administration of Lower Egypt during the final years of Ramesses XI's reign. After the pharaoh's death, Smendes would become the founder of the 21st dynasty, establishing a new royal line while Herihor's successors retained enormous authority in Thebes. The result was an Egypt unlike the centralized empire of earlier centuries. Rather than one ruler exercising complete control, power seems to have been divided among several prominent leaders, each governing different regions while acknowledging, at least formally, the authority of the aging pharaoh. The surviving records reflect this unusual arrangement. Documents from the period often refer to an era known as the Renaissance, or Was Amenmesse, meaning repeating of births. The title suggests an attempt to restore order after years of instability. Yet historians continue debating what this renewal actually represented. Was it a genuine recovery led by Ramesses XI, or an effort by regional leaders to stabilize a kingdom whose central government had already weakened? Evidence from the royal tombs raises further questions. During this period, widespread tomb robberies affected even the sacred burial grounds of the Valley of the Kings. Official investigations documented stolen treasures, damaged mummies, and corrupt officials. The fact that such crimes occurred on a significant scale has led some historians to wonder whether the royal administration had lost much of its former ability to enforce law and order. Even the political titles of the time hint at shifting realities. Herihor appears in temple scenes with honors remarkably similar to those of a pharaoh, while Ramesses XI continued issuing official inscriptions elsewhere. Was this a carefully negotiated sharing of power, or simply the visible sign of a monarchy gradually losing control over its own kingdom? Some scholars argue that Ramesses XI deliberately delegated authority to trusted officials as practical necessity demanded. Egypt's immense size and growing internal challenges may have required regional leaders capable of acting independently while remaining loyal to the throne. Others believe the situation was far less orderly. According to this interpretation, Herihor and Smendes quietly established their own spheres of influence while allowing Ramesses XI to remain the symbolic head of state. The appearance of unity may have concealed a political landscape already preparing for the end of the new kingdom. More speculative theories even suggest that official records were carefully crafted to preserve the image of a strong monarchy long after its authority had begun to dissolve, although direct evidence for such claims remains limited. When Ramesses XI finally disappeared from history, no dramatic conquest or revolution marked the occasion. Instead, Egypt entered a new political era almost seamlessly, with regional powers assuming roles they had already begun to occupy. It was a quiet transformation, yet one that permanently altered the structure of the kingdom. Today, the inscriptions at Karnak, Tanis, and Thebes continue to preserve fragments of those final years. They speak of priests who governed like kings, officials who founded dynasties, and a pharaoh whose authority remains difficult to measure. Whether Ramesses XI truly ruled until the end, or whether power had already slipped into other hands, is a mystery that still lingers among the fading inscriptions of Egypt's last great empire. If the final years of Ramesses XI reveal how power could quietly drift away from a pharaoh, another figure from an earlier generation demonstrates just how influential a single official could become. His story is one of remarkable ambition, sudden prominence, and an equally dramatic disappearance. Few non-royal men in ancient Egypt rose as high or fell as abruptly as Chancellor Bay. The cliffs of the Valley of the Kings glow softly beneath the morning sun, while nearby tombs preserve the names of rulers, queens, and nobles whose lives shaped the destiny of Egypt. Among these monuments are scattered inscriptions mentioning a man who was neither king nor prince, yet whose authority became so extraordinary that his image appeared beside members of the royal family. His name was Bay, and for a brief moment, he seemed to stand at the very center of Egyptian power. Bay emerged during the turbulent closing years of the 19th dynasty, a period marked by disputed successions, political uncertainty, and shifting alliances within the royal court. Unlike the pharaohs he served, Bay appears to have come from outside Egypt. Several inscriptions suggest that he was of Asiatic origin, possibly arriving from regions along the eastern Mediterranean. In earlier centuries, such a background might have limited his opportunities. Instead, Bay climbed steadily through the ranks of government until he became Great Chancellor, one of the highest offices in the kingdom. His influence is unusually well documented. Monuments portray Bay receiving honors rarely granted to officials. In some inscriptions, he is credited with helping place Pharaoh Siptah upon the throne after the death of Seti II. Whether this reflects genuine political leadership or carefully crafted royal propaganda remains uncertain, but the language itself is extraordinary. It presents Bay not simply as an advisor, but as a central figure in securing Egypt's succession during a moment of instability. At the same time, Queen Twosret emerged as another powerful force within the royal court. She initially governed as regent for the young Siptah, before eventually assuming full kingship herself. The relationship between Bay, Twosret, and the young pharaoh has fascinated historians for generations. Were they close political allies working together to stabilize Egypt, or rivals navigating an increasingly fragile government? The surviving evidence offers only fragments. Some inscriptions imply that Bay exercised enormous authority over administrative affairs, perhaps rivaling even the royal household in influence. His name appears in prominent locations, suggesting a confidence unusual for someone outside the royal bloodline. To later observers, it almost seems as though Bay believed his position was secure. Then, almost without warning, everything changed. For many years, historians assumed that Bay remained influential throughout Siptah's reign. However, the discovery of an ostracon, a simple inscribed piece of limestone from Deir el-Medina, transformed that understanding. The text records a royal announcement stating that Chancellor Bay had been executed in the 5th year of Siptah's reign. No explanation accompanies the order. There is no surviving trial record, no formal accusation, and no detailed account of the events leading to his death. One of the most powerful men in Egypt simply disappears from the historical stage, leaving behind little more than a brief official notice. Why was he executed? One possibility is that Bay became too powerful. Throughout Egyptian history, pharaohs depended upon capable officials, but excessive personal influence could easily become politically dangerous. If Bay's authority began overshadowing that of the young king or Queen Twosret, eliminating him may have been viewed as necessary to preserve royal control. Another theory suggests that shifting alliances within the palace sealed his fate. Political loyalties during this period were constantly changing, and officials who prospered under one faction could quickly become liabilities under another. Bay may have found himself isolated as the balance of power evolved. Some researchers have proposed that accusations of treason or conspiracy lay behind the execution, although no surviving evidence confirms such charges. Others wonder whether Bay attempted to influence the succession more directly than official records admit, placing himself at the center of royal politics in ways that ultimately proved unacceptable. More speculative interpretations go even further. A handful of scholars have questioned whether Bay's foreign origin contributed to his downfall during a time of increasing instability. Others suggest that later rulers deliberately minimized his achievements after his execution, ensuring that future generations would remember his fall more clearly than his remarkable rise. These ideas remain unproven, yet they reflect the unusual silence surrounding a man who once stood so close to the throne. Today, Chancellor Bay survives in scattered inscriptions, unfinished monuments, and a single remarkable announcement ordering his death. His story unfolds like a political drama preserved only in fragments: a gifted administrator, an ambitious statesman, or perhaps a kingmaker whose influence extended too far. Somewhere within the missing records of Egypt's royal court may lie the truth behind his spectacular ascent and sudden destruction, waiting to reveal whether Bay was the architect of his own downfall or the victim of a struggle hidden behind palace walls. If Chancellor Bay's sudden fall reminds us how quickly influence could disappear inside the Egyptian court, the next mystery takes us to an even more transformative moment in the nation's history. Here, the question is not whether a single official lost power, but whether an entire kingdom quietly turned against its own pharaoh while he was still alive. The abandoned city of Amarna stretches across the eastern bank of the Nile in an almost dreamlike silence. Low stone foundations mark the outlines of palaces, temples, and administrative buildings that once formed the heart of a bold new capital. Wind moves through empty courtyards where priests once praised the Aten beneath the open sky. Unlike the great temples of Karnak or Luxor, these sanctuaries were designed without dark inner chambers, allowing sunlight to flood every sacred space. They stand today as monuments to one man's extraordinary vision, and perhaps to the resistance that vision inspired. When Akhenaten came to the throne, he initiated one of the most dramatic transformations in Egyptian history. He elevated the Aten, represented by the sun's radiant disk, above Egypt's traditional gods, and gradually dismantled the immense religious influence of the priesthood of Amun. Temples dedicated to long-established deities lost royal support, their wealth redirected toward the new cult centered at Amarna. For a time, the changes appeared successful. Royal inscriptions celebrated harmony between the king, the Aten, and the people. Art adopted an entirely new style, portraying the royal family with unprecedented intimacy and realism. Foreign envoys continued to visit the court, while massive construction projects reshaped the landscape. Yet, beneath these official images, signs of growing strain begin to emerge. One of the most important sources from this period is the collection known as the Amarna Letters, clay tablets preserving diplomatic correspondence between Egypt and neighboring kingdoms. Many of these messages describe governors pleading for military assistance, warning of unrest, and reporting attacks by rival groups. Although the letters focus largely on Egypt's territories abroad, rather than conditions within the kingdom itself, they reveal an administration increasingly occupied by external pressures. At the same time, the enormous resources required to build Amarna and support the new religious system may have placed considerable stress on Egypt's economy. Traditional priesthoods lost both influence and income, while generations of religious customs were suddenly abandoned. Such sweeping reforms almost certainly affected powerful institutions that had shaped Egyptian society for centuries. did opposition begin to grow inside the kingdom? The archaeological evidence offers intriguing hints but few direct answers. Near the end of Akhenaten's reign, construction projects at Amarna slowed noticeably. Some buildings remained unfinished. Certain inscriptions appear incomplete, while royal monuments show signs of alteration. Whether these changes reflect economic difficulties, changing political priorities, or growing instability remains uncertain. After Akhenaten's death, the reversal was remarkably swift. Tutankhamun restored the traditional gods. The royal court abandoned Amarna. Temples dedicated to the Aten fell into disuse, and many monuments bearing Akhenaten's name were dismantled or reused as building material. Later, pharaohs went even further, omitting Akhenaten from official king lists and attempting to erase much of his memory from Egyptian history. This dramatic reversal has led many historians to wonder whether resistance had already begun before the king's death. One widely accepted interpretation suggests that opposition remained largely political rather than openly violent. Influential officials, priests, and military leaders may have quietly prepared for a return to traditional religion while avoiding direct confrontation with the reigning pharaoh. If so, the restoration that followed Akhenaten's death was not an unexpected revolution, but the completion of plans already taking shape during his final years. Others have proposed a more active form of resistance. Could influential members of the court have deliberately limited support for Akhenaten's policies, slowed construction, or weakened his authority from within? The surviving evidence cannot confirm such actions, yet the rapid abandonment of Amarna continues to fuel speculation. More controversial theories go further still. Some writers have imagined secret conspiracies involving the priesthood of Amun, hidden councils plotting the king's removal, or even attempts to depose Akhenaten before his natural death. Others suggest that his increasingly isolated devotion to the Aten may have distanced him from military commanders and provincial governors, leaving him politically vulnerable. These ideas remain speculative, resting largely upon historical silence rather than direct archaeological proof. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies in what was deliberately erased. Later rulers worked systematically to dismantle Akhenaten's monuments and remove his legacy from official history. In doing so, they may also have destroyed valuable records describing the kingdom's final years under his rule. Today, the silent ruins of Amarna preserve only fragments of that extraordinary experiment. Between unfinished temples, broken statues, and scattered diplomatic letters lingers an unanswered question. Did Akhenaten rule his final years over a kingdom that still believed in his vision, or had the revolt already begun long before history recorded the end of his reign? If the final years of Akhenaten suggest that a ruler's greatest enemies may have stood quietly within his own kingdom, the story of Pharaoh Apries carries that possibility into one of Egypt's last great native dynasties. Here, loyalty shifted with astonishing speed. Trusted commanders became rivals, and the line between protector and betrayer grew almost impossible to distinguish. The winds of the Nile Delta drift across the weathered ruins of Sais, once the capital of Egypt during the 26th dynasty. Little remains of the city's former grandeur, yet beneath its soil lay the center of a kingdom that briefly restored Egypt's prestige after centuries of foreign invasions and political upheaval. From this royal seat, Pharaoh Apries ruled a nation seeking stability in an increasingly dangerous world. But while Egypt's borders faced threats abroad, an even greater danger may have been gathering within its own army. Apries, known to the ancient Greeks as Hofra, inherited a kingdom that still possessed considerable wealth and military strength. His reign, beginning in the early 6th century BC, was marked by ambitious foreign policy. Egypt sought to extend its influence throughout the eastern Mediterranean, supporting allies and attempting to counter the expanding power of Babylon. These campaigns reflected the confidence of a ruler determined to preserve Egypt's place among the great kingdoms of the ancient Near East. One military expedition, however, appears to have changed everything. Ancient sources describe a disastrous Egyptian campaign against the Greek colony of Cyrene in North Africa. The defeat was severe enough that many Egyptian soldiers reportedly believed they had been deliberately sacrificed for the benefit of foreign mercenaries serving the king. Whether this accusation reflected reality or merely frustration after a costly failure remains uncertain, but its consequences were profound. Discontent spread rapidly through the army. Faced with growing unrest, Apries appointed one of his trusted military commanders, Ramesses, to calm the rebellion and restore order. It seemed like a logical decision. A respected officer might persuade dissatisfied troops to remain loyal to the crown. Instead, something unexpected occurred. According to both Egyptian evidence and the Greek historian Herodotus, the soldiers proclaimed Ramesses their new king. The very man entrusted with suppressing the revolt suddenly found himself leading it. Whether Ramesses actively encouraged this dramatic turn of events or was swept into leadership by forces beyond his control remains one of the central mysteries of the period. Civil conflict followed. Apries attempted to reclaim his throne, relying heavily on foreign mercenaries who had remained loyal to him. Battles were fought, alliances shifted, and Egypt entered another period of internal division. Eventually, Ramesses emerged victorious, while Apries disappeared from power. Yet, the circumstances surrounding the former king's final fate remain remarkably uncertain. Some records suggest that Apries initially survived his defeat and was treated with a degree of respect before later dying during renewed conflict. Herodotus describes him as eventually being captured and killed by his own people after another failed attempt to recover the throne. Egyptian inscriptions, however, present a more restrained picture, emphasizing the legitimacy of Ramesses's rule while revealing little about the dramatic events that removed his predecessor. Who, then, truly betrayed Apries? The most direct answer points toward Ramesses himself. After all, he accepted the royal crown while still serving as the king's appointed commander. Yet another interpretation presents a more complicated picture. Perhaps Ramesses never intended to overthrow his ruler, but found himself elevated by an army that no longer trusted Apries. Refusing the crown under such circumstances may have been impossible, or even fatal. Others look beyond individual personalities. Some historians argue that Apries' greatest enemy was not a single man, but a growing divide within the Egyptian military. Native Egyptian soldiers may have become increasingly resentful of the king's reliance on foreign mercenaries, creating tensions that eventually erupted into open rebellion. If so, Ramesses may have represented the army's frustrations rather than orchestrating them. More speculative theories continue to circulate. Some suggest that influential nobles and priests quietly supported Ramesses long before the revolt became public, carefully preparing the political transition behind closed doors. Others wonder whether Apries' foreign policies had already weakened his support among Egypt's elite, making his downfall almost inevitable regardless of who led the uprising. These possibilities remain difficult to prove because contemporary records reveal only fragments of a much larger story. Today, the ruins of Sais preserve few visible traces of the struggle that transformed Egypt's leadership. The surviving inscriptions speak cautiously. Greek historians offer dramatic accounts, and archaeology fills only part of the gap between them. Somewhere within those missing years lies the answer to an enduring question. Was Pharaoh Apries betrayed by a trusted general, abandoned by his own army, or quietly undone by forces that had already decided his reign was over long before the first sword was drawn? If the downfall of Pharaoh Apries demonstrates how swiftly a trusted commander could become a king, an earlier chapter in Egyptian history presents another remarkable rise to power. This time, the records speak of disorder, contested rule, and a man who emerged from the chaos to found an entirely new dynasty. Yet, despite his success, the path that brought Setnakht to the throne remains one of Egypt's enduring political mysteries. The desert cliffs of western Thebes glow with deep shades of gold as the first rays of sunlight strike the entrances to ancient tombs. Nearby, temple walls bear inscriptions celebrating the victories of rulers who claimed to have restored order after times of crisis. Among those names is Setnakht, the founder of the 20th dynasty, a king remembered as the man who rescued Egypt from turmoil. But behind those carefully carved declarations lies a far more complicated story. When the 19th dynasty approached its end, Egypt appears to have entered a period of remarkable instability. The reign of Queen Twosret, one of the few women to rule as pharaoh in her own right, concluded under circumstances that remain difficult to reconstruct. Administrative records become scarce, royal succession grows uncertain, and later inscriptions describe the kingdom as having fallen into confusion. The most important source for this period comes from the Great Harris Papyrus, commissioned during the reign of Ramesses III, Setnakht's son. It presents a dramatic account of Egypt before Setnakht's accession. According to the text, foreign influence had spread across the land, temples had fallen into neglect, and the country lacked effective leadership. Setnakht is portrayed as the ruler who restored stability, expelled disruptive forces, and reunited the kingdom. Yet historians approach these claims with caution. Royal inscriptions were designed to celebrate kings, not provide impartial histories. Every new dynasty sought to justify its legitimacy by emphasizing the failures of those who came before. The chaos described in the papyrus may contain genuine historical memories, but it was also shaped to present Setnakht as Egypt's rightful savior. One of the greatest mysteries concerns the identity of his predecessor. Did Setnakht overthrow Queen Twosret by force? Some archaeological evidence suggests that construction work associated with Twosret was interrupted or appropriated during his reign. Her tomb in the Valley of the Kings appears to have undergone changes after her death, while traces of her monuments were altered or replaced. These observations have led many scholars to conclude that her reign ended abruptly. But was there a civil war? Direct evidence for large-scale conflict remains surprisingly limited. There are no surviving battle accounts describing a final confrontation between Setnakht and Twosret's supporters. Instead, the transition appears primarily through altered monuments, revised inscriptions, and changes in royal administration. Another intriguing figure occasionally enters the discussion: Irsu, a shadowy individual mentioned in the Great Harris Papyrus. The text describes him as a foreigner who exercised influence during Egypt's period of disorder before Setnakht restored order. Exactly who Irsu was remains uncertain. Some researchers believe he represented a real political leader who exploited Egypt's instability. Others argue that he may have been exaggerated, or even invented, as a symbolic embodiment of chaos, allowing Setnakht's achievements to appear even greater. The uncertainty surrounding Irsu makes reconstructing this period especially difficult. If he truly held power, how did he gain such influence? Was he supported by factions within Egypt, or did he simply become a convenient explanation for a troubled succession? Setnakht himself remains an enigmatic figure. His family background is not fully understood, and although he successfully established the 20th dynasty, the precise basis of his claim to the throne is still debated. Some historians believe he possessed legitimate royal ancestry through a branch of the previous dynasty. Others suggest that his authority rested primarily upon military strength and support from influential officials who sought stability after years of uncertainty. More speculative theories venture even further. Some propose that Setnakht quietly built alliances within the priesthood and army long before openly claiming the crown, waiting for the right moment to act. Others imagine that much of the political struggle was later erased from official history to present his accession as peaceful and divinely ordained. These ideas remain impossible to verify, yet they continue to attract attention because the surviving evidence leaves so many unanswered questions. By the time Setnakht's reign was firmly established, Egypt once again projected an image of strength and continuity. His son, Ramesses III, would become one of the last great pharaohs of the new kingdom, preserving his father's legacy in monumental inscriptions that celebrated the restoration of order. Yet, beneath those confident proclamations lies a quieter mystery. Did Setnakht rescue a kingdom collapsing into anarchy? Or did he seize an opportunity created by political uncertainty and later reshape the story to secure his dynasty's place in history? Somewhere between the official inscriptions and the fragments left behind by those who disappeared, the true path to Egypt's throne may still remain hidden beneath the sands of time. If Setnakht's rise marked the beginning of the 20th dynasty and temporarily restored stability, the final years of that dynasty would bring Egypt to another turning point. This time there was no dramatic invasion or single catastrophic battle. Instead, one of the greatest empires of the ancient world seemed to slowly dissolve from within, leaving behind a mystery that historians continue to unravel. The abandoned temples of Thebes stand beneath an endless desert sky, their towering columns casting long shadows over cracked stone floors. Sacred lakes have grown still, processional roads lie silent, and colossal statues gaze across a landscape that once pulsed with royal authority. These monuments were built to proclaim the permanence of Egypt's kings. Yet, by the time Ramesses XI disappeared from history, even these symbols of stability stood in a kingdom that was quietly transforming into something entirely different. Ramesses XI was the last pharaoh of the new kingdom, an era that had lasted for nearly 5 centuries and witnessed Egypt's greatest territorial expansion, monumental construction, and political influence. His reign closed not only a dynasty, but an entire chapter of Egyptian civilization. What followed remains one of the most fascinating transitions in Egyptian history. Unlike many ancient kingdoms that collapsed through sudden conquest, Egypt did not vanish overnight. Temples continued operating. Officials still collected taxes. Religious ceremonies remained active. Royal inscriptions did not abruptly cease. On the surface, daily life continued much as before. Yet, beneath that appearance, authority had become increasingly fragmented. In the south, the high priests of Amun, based in Thebes, exercised immense political, military, and economic power. Their control over temple estates, agricultural lands, and local administration made them rulers in all but name. In the north, Smendes governed from Tanis in the Nile Delta, maintaining authority over Lower Egypt and eventually establishing the 21st dynasty after Ramesses XI's death. Rather than one unified kingdom, Egypt gradually became divided between powerful regional administrations. The reasons behind this transformation remain the subject of ongoing debate. Economic pressures had been mounting for generations. Maintaining monumental building projects, supporting large armies, and managing an extensive bureaucracy placed enormous demands on the state's resources. Records from the later New Kingdom describe delayed payments to workers, shortages of supplies, and increasing financial strain. Even the royal tomb builders at Deir el-Medina organized what is widely considered one of history's earliest recorded labor strikes after failing to receive their rations. Foreign circumstances also played an important role. Egypt's influence across the eastern Mediterranean had steadily declined after the widespread disruptions that affected many Bronze Age civilizations. Trade networks became less reliable, valuable resources grew harder to obtain, and maintaining distant territories became increasingly difficult. The empire that earlier pharaohs had built gradually contracted toward the Nile Valley itself. At the same time, repeated tomb robberies exposed another troubling reality. Investigative papyri from the period document organized thefts targeting even the royal burials in the Valley of the Kings. Officials, workers, and priests were sometimes implicated in these crimes. The fact that sacred tombs could be plundered on such a scale suggests that confidence in central authority had weakened considerably. Yet, no single event explains the end of the New Kingdom. There is no evidence of one decisive battle, one invading army, or one revolutionary leader bringing Egypt's golden age to an abrupt conclusion. Instead, historians increasingly view the collapse as a gradual process shaped by overlapping political, economic, environmental, and administrative challenges. Some scholars argue that Egypt adapted remarkably well, avoiding complete collapse through regional cooperation between leaders like Mendes and the high priests of Amun. Others see the division itself as evidence that the monarchy had already lost effective control long before Ramesses XI died. More speculative theories continue to emerge. Some suggest that undiscovered archives may still preserve correspondence revealing private negotiations between Egypt's regional rulers as they quietly reorganized power. Others wonder whether official records intentionally softened the reality of the transition to preserve the image of uninterrupted royal legitimacy. While such ideas remain unverified, they reflect the remarkable gaps that still exist in our understanding of this pivotal period. When later generations looked back, they remembered the great warrior kings, the vast temples, and the imperial triumphs of the New Kingdom. Far fewer records described how that extraordinary era quietly came to an end. Today, the silent temples, abandoned tombs, and scattered papyri preserve only fragments of those final decades. They tell of a civilization that did not simply fall but slowly transformed, leaving historians with a profound question. Did the New Kingdom truly collapse? Or did it evolve so gradually that those living through its final years never realized they were witnessing the end of one of history's greatest empires? If the end of the New Kingdom reminds us that entire dynasties can fade into uncertainty, one mystery from its earlier years remains deeply personal. It is the story of a prince whose name became forever linked to treason, whose final moments were never fully recorded, and whose possible remains continue to provoke debate among historians and scientists alike. Hidden within a secluded cache near Deir el-Bahari, where priests once concealed royal mummies from ancient tomb robbers, rests one of Egypt's most unusual burials. Unlike the carefully wrapped bodies of celebrated pharaohs, this mummy appears almost neglected. Its mouth hangs open in what has often been called a silent scream. The wrappings are crude, the treatment unusually careless, and instead of fine linen, the body is enclosed in a goatskin, an animal hide regarded by many ancient Egyptians as ritually impure. Every detail suggests that whoever lay inside was denied the honors normally granted to members of the royal family. Many researchers have wondered whether this could be Prince Pentawer. Pentawer was the son of Queen Tiye, one of the central figures in the famous Harem conspiracy during the reign of Ramesses III. According to the judicial papyrus of Turin, the conspiracy sought to remove the aging pharaoh and place Pentawer on the throne instead of the designated heir. Palace officials, servants, military officers, and members of the royal household were accused of participating in the plot, creating one of the most thoroughly documented political conspiracies in ancient Egyptian history. The surviving records describe the trials in remarkable detail. Several conspirators were executed. Others received severe punishments. Pentawer himself was found guilty, but the official documents use unusually restrained language when describing his fate. Rather than stating that he was publicly executed, the papyrus records that he was left in his place and that he took his own life. Those few words have inspired centuries of debate. Did Pentawer truly commit suicide, perhaps by poison, as many historians believe? Was he quietly allowed to end his own life to preserve a measure of royal dignity despite his betrayal? Such treatment would have distinguished him from ordinary criminals while still removing him from the line of succession. Modern scientific studies have added another layer to the mystery. The so-called Screaming Man E mummy has undergone extensive examination using CT scans and DNA analysis. Researchers discovered that the individual was a young man with close genetic ties to Ramesses III, making it highly likely that he belonged to the royal family. Some DNA evidence suggests a father-son relationship with the pharaoh, making Pentawer a plausible candidate. The mummy itself is equally intriguing. The body shows signs that may be consistent with death by strangulation or hanging, although the evidence is not conclusive. Certain features of the neck have prompted speculation that compression occurred before death, while the permanently open mouth has often been interpreted as evidence of violent suffering. However, specialists caution that changes during decomposition and mummification can produce similar appearances, making definitive conclusions difficult. The unusual burial only deepens the mystery. Why was this individual denied the elaborate embalming techniques usually reserved for royalty? Was the goatskin wrapping intended as a deliberate mark of disgrace? Or did those responsible for the burial struggle to reconcile his royal blood with his conviction for treason? Some historians argue that every aspect of the burial reflects careful symbolism. Pentawer may have received enough respect to preserve his body, but not enough honor to join the other princes in a traditional royal burial. Others believe the unusual treatment may have served as a permanent warning against betrayal within the royal household. More speculative theories continue to circulate. Some suggest that Pentawer may not have acted willingly in the conspiracy, but was manipulated by powerful figures surrounding his ambitious mother. Others wonder whether the official trials concealed the identities of additional conspirators whose influence allowed them to escape punishment. If so, Pentawer may have become the most visible casualty of a much larger political struggle. These possibilities remain impossible to verify, yet they continue to fascinate because the surviving records stop just short of revealing the full story. Today, the silent mummy with the open mouth continues to rest among Egypt's royal dead, preserving secrets that neither science nor history has completely unlocked. If the body truly belongs to Prince Pentawer, it stands as one of the most haunting reminders that royal blood offered no protection from political ambition. Yet, even after thousands of years, one question remains suspended between the papyrus records and the evidence of the mummy itself. Did Pentawer choose his own death, or was that final act merely the last chapter of a story written by others? If the uncertain fate of Prince Pentawer reveals how easily royal identities could become entangled with politics, the next mystery introduces a king whose very existence seems to blur the line between rightful ruler and forgotten rival. His monuments were altered, his name was erased from many records, and even today, historians continue to debate a remarkably simple question: who was Amenmesse really? The entrance to tomb K510 in the Valley of the Kings lies quietly beneath the desert cliffs, its corridors descending into darkness where fragments of painted plaster still cling to ancient walls. The tomb was prepared for a pharaoh, yet it bears unmistakable signs of interruption. Decorations were abandoned, names were replaced, and later occupants altered parts of the burial. It is a monument that seems to reflect the uncertainty of the man for whom it was originally intended, Pharaoh Amenmesse. Unlike rulers whose family histories are well documented, Amenmesse emerges suddenly during the closing years of the 19th dynasty. His name appears on monuments in Upper Egypt, particularly around Thebes and Nubia, where inscriptions acknowledge him with the full royal titles of a reigning king. Yet, elsewhere in Egypt, another pharaoh, Seti II, was also claiming the throne. For a brief period, two kings may have ruled the same kingdom. The most widely accepted interpretation is that Amenmesse challenged Seti II for control of Egypt during a succession crisis. Archaeological evidence suggests that he exercised authority over southern regions while Seti II maintained influence elsewhere. Temples, statues, and official inscriptions preserve traces of both rulers, often layered over one another as political fortunes shifted. But the deeper mystery concerns Amenmesse himself. Who was he before he became king? Many Egyptologists believe he was a son of Pharaoh Merneptah, making him a legitimate member of the royal family and a possible rival claimant after Merneptah's death. If this reconstruction is correct, Amenmesse may have believed he possessed every right to wear the double crown, transforming what later generations described as a rebellion into a genuine dispute over succession. Other scholars remain unconvinced. The evidence identifying his parents is incomplete, and no surviving inscription clearly states his lineage. Some researchers have proposed that Amenmesse belonged to a lesser branch of the royal family, while others suggest he may have relied more upon military support and regional alliances than hereditary rights. Without definitive genealogical records, his origins remain uncertain. The monuments themselves deepen the puzzle. After Seti II regained control, many references to Amenmesse were systematically erased. His cartouches were chiseled away, statues altered, and official recognition largely removed from later king lists. Such deliberate destruction raises an important question. Was Amenmesse erased because he was an illegitimate usurper, or because he represented a rival whose claim remained politically dangerous even after his defeat? His burial adds another layer of uncertainty. The unfinished tomb in the Valley of the King suggests that Amenmesse expected to reign long enough to complete an elaborate royal resting place. Instead, work appears to have stopped abruptly. Later modifications indicate that portions of the tomb were reused, while the king's original burial remains poorly understood. No confirmed royal mummy has been identified as Amenmesse, leaving even his final resting place open to debate. Some historians view his reign as relatively brief but genuine, arguing that Egypt experienced a temporary division before Seti II ultimately restored centralized authority. Others believe Amenmesse's influence may have been greater than surviving records now reveal, with later rulers intentionally minimizing his accomplishments through systematic erasure. More speculative theories push the mystery even further. A few researchers have wondered whether Amenmesse and Seti II reached temporary political agreements before relations collapsed, allowing both rulers to govern different regions for a time. Others suggest that influential priests or military commanders may have quietly supported Amenmesse, only to later remove evidence of their involvement after Seti II emerged victorious. These possibilities remain difficult to verify because the surviving archaeological record is fragmented and often shaped by deliberate revision. Today, the scattered monuments of Amenmesse continue to stand as silent witnesses to one of Egypt's least understood reigns. Every erased inscription, unfinished corridor, and damaged cartouche hints at a struggle that official history tried to forget. Was Amenmesse an ambitious usurper who briefly seized power, or a legitimate king whose memory was deliberately buried beneath the victories of his rival. Somewhere beneath the layers of rewritten history, the true identity of this elusive pharaoh may still be waiting to emerge. If Amenmesse's erased legacy reminds us how easily a king's story can be rewritten, the next mystery concerns a ruler whose reign ended almost as suddenly as it began. Unlike those who disappeared through political intrigue alone, Kamose left behind monuments celebrating military triumphs, but almost nothing explaining why his campaign, and perhaps his life, came to such an abrupt conclusion. The waters of the Nile flow quietly past the ancient city of Thebes, reflecting the towering cliffs that once guarded the heart of southern Egypt. Along these riverbanks, war fleets were assembled, soldiers prepared for battle, and a young pharaoh launched one of the most important military campaigns in Egyptian history. Stone stelae erected in his honor still proclaim determination and victory, yet they fall strangely silent when it comes to the king's final days. Kamose ruled during the closing years of the Second Intermediate Period, when Egypt remained divided between the native rulers of Thebes and the Hyksos kingdom in the north. He inherited a conflict that had already claimed the life of his father, Seqenenre II, whose violent death became a symbol of resistance against foreign domination. Rather than seeking compromise, Kamose chose confrontation. His inscriptions reveal a confident and ambitious ruler. The famous Kamose stele describe campaigns northward against the Hyksos, portraying the young king as a determined warrior intent on restoring Egypt's unity. One remarkable passage records the interception of a message sent by the Hyksos king Apophis to the ruler of Kush in Nubia. According to the inscription, the letter sought to coordinate an attack against Kamose from both north and south. By capturing the messenger, Kamose prevented the alliance and demonstrated his strategic skill. These victories suggest momentum. Military success appeared to be shifting the balance of power in favor of Thebes. The Hyksos were under increasing pressure, and the dream of a reunified Egypt seemed closer than it had been in generations. Then, without warning, Kamose disappears from the historical record. His reign lasted only a few years. The exact length remains uncertain, but most historians estimate it ended after approximately 3 to 5 years on the throne. There are no detailed royal accounts describing his death, no surviving records of a final battle, and no contemporary explanation for why such a successful campaign suddenly came to an end. The most straightforward explanation is that Kamose died during the war. Given his active leadership in military campaigns, it is entirely possible that he was killed in combat while continuing his advance against the Hyksos. Ancient Egyptian kings frequently accompanied their armies, and warfare during this period was exceptionally dangerous. If Kamose fell on the battlefield, later generations may have viewed his sacrifice as part of the larger struggle that ultimately liberated Egypt. Yet, direct evidence remains elusive. Unlike the mummy of his father, Seqenenre II, whose skull preserves unmistakable battle wounds, Kamose's remains have not provided a comparable answer. A mummy believed by some scholars to be his was discovered in poor condition during the 19th century, but it lacks clear evidence explaining the cause of death. Questions surrounding its identification and preservation have prevented definitive conclusions. Another possibility is that illness ended his reign. Ancient Egypt was no stranger to disease, and even victorious rulers could succumb unexpectedly. Without medical records or detailed contemporary accounts, a fatal illness cannot be ruled out. Such an explanation would also account for the abrupt transition to the reign of his younger brother, Ahmose I. Some historians have explored political explanations as well. Could Kamose's death have resulted from internal rivalry rather than foreign conflict? The evidence offers little support for assassination, yet periods of war often intensified struggles within royal courts. If competing factions existed among the Theban elite, the king's sudden disappearance naturally invites speculation. Still, no surviving inscription points directly toward conspiracy. More speculative theories imagine an even more dramatic ending. A few researchers have suggested that Kamose may have suffered fatal wounds during a victorious campaign, dying only after returning to Thebes. Others wonder whether important records describing his final expedition were later lost or deliberately destroyed as Ahmose's reign came to symbolize the ultimate victory over the Hyksos. These ideas remain unproven, resting largely upon the unusual silence surrounding the king's final years. What followed is beyond dispute. Ahmose I completed the campaign, expelled the Hyksos from Egypt, and founded the 18th dynasty, ushering in the new kingdom and one of the greatest eras in Egyptian history. Yet, that success inevitably casts a shadow over the man who laid much of the foundation for it. Today, Kamose stands as both conqueror and mystery, a warrior king whose inscriptions celebrate bold victories while revealing almost nothing about his own final chapter. Somewhere between the triumphant words carved on his stele and the silence that followed them lies the answer to one enduring question. Did Kamose die as a hero on the battlefield, fall victim to unseen forces, or leave behind a story that history itself quietly allowed to disappear? If the sudden death of Kamose reminds us how quickly a promising reign could come to an unexpected end, another chapter of Egyptian history introduces a ruler whose legacy became just as uncertain. This time, the mystery centers not on how a monarch died, but on how a queen rose to supreme power, and why her reign seemed to vanish almost as soon as it began. The entrance to tomb K14 in the Valley of the Kings descends through a maze of corridors covered with brilliantly painted scenes of gods, sacred rituals, and the journey into the afterlife. At first glance, the tomb appears to belong to a single ruler, yet a closer look reveals repeated alterations. Royal names have been replaced, decorations extended, and entire sections modified for different occupants. Like the monument itself, the life of Queen Twosret is layered with revisions, leaving historians to piece together the story of one of Egypt's final female pharaohs. Twosret emerged during the turbulent closing years of the 19th dynasty, a period marked by disputed succession, political uncertainty, and shifting alliances within the royal court. She was the great royal wife of Pharaoh Seti II, but after his death, the throne passed to the young Siptah. Because the new king was still very young and may have suffered from physical disabilities, Twosret assumed the role of regent, guiding the kingdom during the early years of his reign. At first, her authority followed familiar traditions. Throughout Egyptian history, royal women had occasionally governed on behalf of child kings. Yet, as Siptah's reign progressed, Twosret's influence appears to have expanded well beyond that of a temporary guardian. Her name became increasingly prominent on monuments, and after Siptah's death, she adopted the full royal titles of a reigning pharaoh. This decision was extraordinary. Although Egypt had previously been ruled by powerful women such as Hatshepsut, female kings remained exceptionally rare. Twosret presented herself not simply as queen, but as sovereign ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt, commissioning monuments and continuing royal construction projects in her own name. Her reign, however, was remarkably brief. Within only a few years, the historical record grows uncertain. Building projects stopped. Administrative documents became scarce. Then, almost suddenly, Setnakht appeared as Egypt's new king, founding the 20th dynasty and bringing Twosret's rule to an end. Exactly what happened remains one of the greatest puzzles of the period. The most widely accepted explanation is that Twosret struggled to maintain authority during a time of growing political instability. Powerful officials, competing factions, and regional leaders may have questioned the legitimacy of her rule, creating conditions that eventually allowed Setnakht to seize power. Yet, the surviving evidence is surprisingly limited. Later inscriptions commissioned by Setnakht and his son Ramesses III describe Egypt before the new dynasty as a land overwhelmed by disorder and foreign influence. These texts portray Setnakht as the ruler who restored stability. But because they were written to celebrate the new dynasty, many historians believe they may exaggerate the failures of Twosret's government while minimizing her accomplishments. Even her magnificent tomb reflects this uncertainty. Originally designed as Twosret's royal burial, KV-14 underwent extensive alterations after her reign ended. Setnakht appropriated portions of the monument for his own burial before eventually being reinterred elsewhere. These changes suggest not only practical reuse, but also a deliberate effort to reshape the memory of the queen who had ruled before him. Some researchers believe Twosret's reign was far more effective than later records admit. They point to evidence of continued construction, stable administration, and ongoing religious activity during her years on the throne. From this perspective, her downfall may have resulted less from failure than from the ambitions of rivals eager to establish a new dynasty. Others remain unconvinced. Could a struggle for succession have escalated into open conflict shortly before Setnakht's accession? Was Twosret removed peacefully, forced to abdicate, or overthrown by military action? The archaeological record has yet to provide definitive answers. More speculative theories suggest that influential court officials quietly abandoned the queen as political alliances shifted, leaving her isolated during the final months of her reign. Others wonder whether later kings intentionally erased evidence of her achievements to strengthen the legitimacy of the dynasty that followed. While these ideas remain unverified, they continue to attract attention because so much of this transition remains hidden behind damaged monuments and incomplete inscriptions. Today, the painted walls of KV-14 preserve the name of a woman who claimed the throne during one of Egypt's most uncertain eras. Her reign was brief, her legacy reshaped, and her story left unfinished. Whether Twosret was a capable ruler overwhelmed by circumstance, a queen caught between rival factions, or the final guardian of a fading dynasty, her true place in Egyptian history remains one of the ancient world's most compelling unanswered questions. As the echoes of another forgotten reign fade into silence, our journey moves deeper into one of the most uncertain chapters of Egypt's imperial story. Here, among damaged monuments, erased names, and unfinished ambitions, another ruler briefly emerged from the shadows before disappearing almost as quickly as he had arrived. The desert wind sweeps across the limestone cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, carrying grains of sand through abandoned corridors where torchlight once flickered against brightly painted walls. Hidden beneath layers of rock lies a modest royal tomb, far smaller than those of Egypt's greatest pharaohs. Its decorations are hurried. Some walls remain unfinished. The colors seem to stop abruptly, as though the artists were interrupted before their work could be completed. Walking through these silent chambers, one senses not the confidence of an empire at its height, but the uncertainty of a kingdom struggling to preserve order. This is the resting place traditionally associated with Pharaoh Siptah. Unlike the grand monuments of Ramesses II or Seti I, Siptah's legacy survives only in fragments. His reign lasted for only a few years during Egypt's 19th dynasty, around the end of the 13th century BC. Yet, despite its brevity, his rule has become one of the dynasty's greatest historical puzzles. Even today, historians continue asking remarkably basic questions. Who exactly was Siptah? Why was he chosen to become king? Who truly exercised power during his reign? And why did later generations seem determined to erase much of his memory? The uncertainty begins with his birth. Royal bloodlines in ancient Egypt were often carefully recorded, especially when succession to the throne depended upon legitimate ancestry. Yet, in Siptah's case, the evidence refuses to fit neatly together. Most scholars believe he was the son of Pharaoh Seti II. Reliefs and inscriptions support this possibility, although they stop short of offering complete certainty. His mother appears to have been a secondary wife rather than a great royal wife, reducing his claim to the throne compared to other royal heirs. Other researchers have proposed alternative possibilities. Could he have been the son of another prince? Was he connected to one branch of the royal family while adopted politically into another? The surviving records are damaged, incomplete, and sometimes contradictory. In several places where his family connections might have been clarified, names have been deliberately erased or overwritten. Whether through accident or intention, history has left his origins shrouded in uncertainty. When Seti II died, Egypt found itself entering another period of political instability. The succession was anything but straightforward. Powerful court officials, military leaders, and influential members of the royal household all possessed reasons to support different candidates. It was within this uncertain environment that the young Siptah suddenly appeared upon the throne. The evidence strongly suggests that he was very young when crowned king. Some historians estimate he may have been only 10 or 11 years old. Others argue he could have been slightly older. Either way, few believe he possessed the experience necessary to govern one of the ancient world's largest empires independently. That raises another enduring question. If Siptah was merely a child, who truly ruled Egypt? The answer leads directly to two of the most fascinating personalities of the late 19th dynasty. One was Queen Twosret, the widow of Seti II, an exceptionally powerful royal woman who had already established significant political influence within the palace. The other was Chancellor Bay, a foreign-born official whose astonishing rise through Egypt's bureaucracy remains remarkable even today. Bay appears throughout surviving inscriptions as a man whose authority extended far beyond ordinary administrative duties. One inscription proudly credits him with placing the king upon his father's throne. Such wording is extraordinary. Ancient Egyptian officials rarely described themselves as makers of kings. Did Bay simply oversee an orderly succession, or did he engineer it? Many Egyptologists interpret the inscription as political propaganda, celebrating loyalty to the crown. Yet others wonder whether Bay possessed influence approaching that of a kingmaker, selecting a young and inexperienced ruler who would depend heavily upon his guidance. The possibility becomes even more intriguing because Bay himself came from outside Egypt. His titles suggest origins somewhere in the eastern Mediterranean, although his exact homeland remains uncertain. Despite this foreign background, he accumulated extraordinary prestige within the Egyptian court. How did a foreign official rise so rapidly during one of Egypt's most politically fragile periods? No surviving document provides a complete answer. At the same time, Queen Twosret held the respected position of great royal wife and possessed dynastic legitimacy that few others could match. Throughout Siptah's reign, her influence appears repeatedly in monuments and inscriptions. Some historians view Bay and Twosret as political partners maintaining stability for a young king. Others see rivals competing quietly behind palace walls. Still others suggest alliances that shifted as circumstances changed, with loyalty lasting only as long as it remained politically useful. The evidence refuses to settle the debate. Adding another layer of mystery is Siptah himself. Modern examination of his mummy has revealed that he suffered from significant physical disabilities. Earlier studies proposed that he had a severely deformed left foot, perhaps caused by poliomyelitis during childhood. More recent medical research has questioned that diagnosis, suggesting alternative explanations involving congenital disorders or traumatic injury instead. Whatever the precise medical condition, it appears that walking would likely have been difficult. This physical limitation has encouraged many historians to reconsider the balance of power within his reign. If the young king faced both youth and disability, influential advisors would naturally have exercised greater authority. Yet, disability alone never prevented Egyptian rulers from governing effectively. Ancient Egyptian kingship emphasized divine legitimacy more than physical perfection. The pharaoh represented cosmic order through religious ritual, military leadership, and ceremonial authority. Physical challenges did not automatically remove that sacred responsibility. Still, Siptah's condition may have made him especially dependent upon those surrounding him. Then came another unexpected development. Only a few years into the reign, Chancellor Bay disappeared. For many years, scholars assumed he remained influential until the king's death. Then, archaeologists discovered a remarkable ostracon, a simple inscribed limestone fragment that transformed understanding of the period. The text records that Bay was executed on the direct orders of King Siptah during the 5th year of the reign. The announcement surprised modern historians because it contradicted long-standing assumptions about Bay's continued dominance. Why was the powerful chancellor suddenly condemned? Had he attempted to seize greater authority? Was he accused of conspiracy? Did Queen Twosret orchestrate his downfall? Or had the young king finally asserted independent control over his own government? No surviving judicial records explain the charges. The official simply vanishes from history almost overnight. His monuments cease. His influence evaporates. His remarkable career ends in silence. For some researchers, Bay's execution suggests that Siptah eventually escaped the control of ambitious advisors. For others, it reflects shifting alliances within a royal court where political fortunes could reverse with astonishing speed. The truth remains hidden behind walls that no longer speak. Then, after ruling for approximately 6 years, Siptah himself died. Again, certainty proves elusive. His mummy indicates that he died relatively young, perhaps during his late teens or early 20s. No evidence clearly identifies the cause of death. Disease remains entirely possible. Ancient Egypt constantly battled infections, epidemics, and illnesses capable of ending lives without warning. Natural causes cannot be excluded. Neither can complications arising from whatever condition affected his leg. Yet, whenever historical records become unusually quiet, speculation inevitably follows. Some have wondered whether palace intrigue played a role. Could political rivals have viewed the young king as an obstacle? Had Bay's supporters sought revenge after the chancellor's execution? Did factions within the royal family prefer another ruler entirely? There is no surviving evidence proving assassination, nor is there evidence completely eliminating the possibility. Like so many mysteries surrounding Siptah, the available clues stop frustratingly short of certainty. Following his death, Queen Twosret assumed the throne in her own right. For a brief period, Egypt possessed one of its rare female pharaohs, ruling independently rather than serving merely as regent. Yet, even this transition would soon collapse into further political turmoil. Eventually, Setnakht founded the 20th dynasty after defeating rival claimants. With a new royal house came new political priorities. And with new priorities came something historians recognize all too well: historical revision. Several monuments originally belonging to Siptah were altered. His names disappeared from some king lists. Certain inscriptions were recarved. Some monuments may even have been appropriated by later rulers. Whether this represented deliberate condemnation or simple political housekeeping remains debated. Ancient Egyptian kings frequently modified monuments for practical reasons, reusing valuable stone while simultaneously strengthening their own legitimacy. Yet, systematic removal also served another purpose. It reshaped memory. Future generations encountering altered monuments would see a cleaner succession, one less troubled by disputed rulers and unstable reigns. The uncomfortable complexities of the late 19th dynasty gradually faded beneath newly carved hieroglyphs. Ironically, those very attempts at rewriting history have deepened the mystery for modern researchers. Every erased name becomes another missing clue. Every damaged inscription raises another question. Every altered monument hints at events powerful enough to justify changing the official record. Even Siptah's tomb reflects this atmosphere of uncertainty. Its hurried decoration suggests unexpected death. Its relatively modest scale implies limited time and perhaps limited resources. The burial itself appears to have been completed quickly, consistent with a reign cut short before monumental building projects could fully mature. Unlike rulers who spent decades preparing elaborate eternal resting places, Siptah seems to have entered eternity before his plans could truly begin. And yet, despite his brief rule, his reign occupies a surprisingly important position within Egypt's history. It stands at the threshold between one great dynasty and another. It reveals how fragile royal succession could become when clear heirs were absent. It exposes the remarkable influence that advisors, queens, and court officials could wield behind the facade of divine kingship. Most importantly, it reminds us that ancient Egypt was not always an empire of unshakable certainty. Sometimes it was a kingdom navigating confusion, competing ambitions, uncertain loyalties, and rulers whose stories nearly vanished beneath the desert itself. Today, archaeologists continue studying damaged reliefs, fragmentary papyri, forgotten inscriptions, and the physical remains of Siptah's mummy, hoping each new discovery might clarify another piece of the puzzle. But every answer seems to uncover another question. Was Siptah merely a young king overwhelmed by forces beyond his control, or was he more influential than history has allowed us to believe? Did later rulers erase him because his reign embarrassed the dynasty, or because it concealed events they preferred the future never remember? Deep within Egypt's silent valleys, where unfinished tombs still rest beneath the desert stone, those questions linger, waiting for evidence that may still lie buried beneath the sands. As the mystery surrounding the young pharaoh Siptah slowly fades into the background, another figure steps forward from the same uncertain era, one whose rise was almost as astonishing as his sudden disappearance. His name survives not in triumphant monuments or celebrated royal chronicles, but in scattered inscriptions, damaged reliefs, and a single remarkable text that transformed historians' understanding of Egypt's turbulent final years of the 19th dynasty. The object itself is surprisingly ordinary. It is not a golden mask or an elaborately carved temple wall. It is a small fragment of limestone, an ostracon, covered with hastily written hieratic script. At first glance, it appears insignificant, the sort of everyday writing surface used by ancient Egyptian officials for notes, accounts, or brief messages. Yet, this humble piece of stone carries one of the most unexpected announcements ever discovered from the royal administration. Its words are direct. Chancellor Bay had been executed. For generations, historians believed Bay remained one of the dominant political figures throughout the reign of Pharaoh Siptah. His monuments suggested extraordinary influence. His titles implied almost limitless authority. Some scholars even imagined him serving as Egypt's true ruler behind a young and inexperienced king. Then, this simple ostracon rewrote the story. Without ceremony or explanation, it records that Bay was put to death on the direct command of King Siptah during the 5th year of the reign. No reason is given, no crime is described, no elaborate royal inscription celebrates justice being served. Only a brief administrative record survives, quietly announcing the end of one of Egypt's most powerful men. Who exactly was Chancellor Bay? That question alone remains surrounded by uncertainty. Unlike most influential Egyptian officials, Bay appears to have originated beyond Egypt's traditional borders. Linguistic evidence suggests he may have come from somewhere in the eastern Mediterranean, perhaps from territories along the coast of modern Syria or neighboring regions. Some researchers believe he entered Egypt as a foreign captive before rising through the royal bureaucracy. Others suggest he arrived voluntarily as an educated administrator seeking opportunity within the empire. His precise origins remain unknown. Yet, whatever his beginnings, Bay accomplished something extraordinarily rare. He climbed from outsider status to become one of the highest-ranking officials in ancient Egypt. His titles reflected immense responsibility. He served as chancellor, great steward, royal scribe, and holder of numerous administrative offices. Monumental inscriptions portray him standing close to the king, participating in ceremonies usually reserved for Egypt's highest elite. One inscription makes an especially remarkable claim. It states that Bay established the king upon the throne of his father. The wording has fascinated historians for decades. Was this simply poetic praise for a loyal servant helping ensure an orderly succession? Or was Bay revealing something much more extraordinary? Ancient Egyptian royal succession was rarely as simple as modern textbooks sometimes suggest. Court politics, family rivalries, military influence, priestly authority, and regional loyalties all shaped the transfer of power. During periods of stability, succession appeared orderly. During moments of crisis, however, powerful individuals behind the scenes could become decisive. The death of Pharaoh Seti II created precisely such uncertainty. Several competing claims to legitimacy existed. Previous civil conflict had already weakened confidence within the royal household. Against this unstable background, the young Siptah emerged as king. Many scholars believe Bay played an essential role in making that happen. If so, his influence may have extended far beyond ordinary administration. Some Egyptologists describe him as a kingmaker. Others caution against exaggeration. Ancient inscriptions often magnified the achievements of favored officials. Expressions celebrating loyalty and service frequently employed dramatic language that was never intended to be interpreted literally. Yet, even allowing for royal propaganda, Bay's prominence remains exceptional. His own funerary preparations further demonstrate his remarkable position. He began constructing an elaborate tomb in the Valley of the Kings, an honor almost unheard of for someone who was not a member of the royal family. Although the project was never completed, its very existence illustrates how extraordinary his career had become. Few officials ever approached such privilege. Naturally, questions followed. How comfortable were Egypt's traditional elites with the astonishing rise of a foreign-born administrator? Did members of the old aristocracy quietly resent his authority? Could military commanders have viewed him as an obstacle? Or had Bay accumulated so much influence that even members of the royal family began to fear him? The surviving evidence remains frustratingly incomplete. Throughout Siptah's early reign, another powerful figure also stood at the center of government. Queen Twosret, as widow of Seti II and one of the dynasty's most influential royal women, Twosret possessed unquestioned legitimacy within the palace. She appears prominently in monuments dating from Siptah's reign, leading many historians to believe she acted as regent while the young king matured. How Bay and Twosret interacted remains one of the period's greatest mysteries. Some researchers imagine a successful political partnership. Together, they may have stabilized Egypt during an uncertain succession. Others envision an increasingly tense rivalry. Perhaps each represented different factions within the royal court. One relied upon bureaucratic authority. The other embodied dynastic legitimacy. Both possessed immense influence. Could cooperation have eventually become competition? No surviving document provides a clear answer. Then came the astonishing announcement preserved on that modest limestone fragment. Bay was dead, executed by royal order. The simplicity of the record almost magnifies its mystery. Ancient Egypt often celebrated royal victories over criminals, rebels, and conspirators through lengthy inscriptions filled with religious symbolism. Treason was presented as an attack upon cosmic order itself. Punishment reinforced the pharaoh's divine authority. Yet Bay's execution receives none of that treatment. There is no public accusation, no dramatic account of guilt, no official explanation survives. It is as though Egypt's administration acknowledged the event while deliberately avoiding discussion of its causes. Historians have naturally attempted to reconstruct what may have happened. One mainstream possibility is that Bay overreached politically. His growing authority may have alarmed both Siptah and Queen Twosret. If the young king gradually assumed greater personal control over government, Bay's extraordinary influence could have become increasingly unacceptable. Perhaps removing him represented nothing more than the restoration of proper royal authority. Another theory centers on palace conspiracy. Ancient royal courts rarely operated without factions competing for influence. Advisors formed alliances. Military officers supported particular nobles. Priests protected temple interests. Even members of the royal household pursued competing ambitions. Could Bay have become entangled in such struggles? Was he accused of plotting against the throne? Did rivals fabricate evidence to eliminate him? Without surviving court records, certainty remains impossible. Some scholars have suggested financial motives. As chancellor, Bay oversaw enormous administrative resources. Control over taxation, labor, construction projects, and state supplies carried immense economic power. Were accusations of corruption involved? Again, no surviving document confirms such speculation. Others focus on international politics. Egypt's empire still maintained diplomatic relationships across the eastern Mediterranean. Foreign-born officials often occupied sensitive positions requiring communication with neighboring kingdoms. Could Bay's foreign origins have eventually become politically dangerous? Did suspicion arise regarding divided loyalties? No evidence directly supports such claims, but neither can they be entirely dismissed. Then there are the more speculative interpretations. Some fringe researchers have suggested that Bay possessed secret knowledge capable of threatening established authority. Others imagine hidden conflicts involving royal succession that never reached official records. A few have even proposed that later rulers intentionally destroyed evidence explaining the execution because it implicated members of the royal family themselves. These ideas remain highly speculative. No archaeological discovery has confirmed them. Yet, they continue circulating precisely because the historical record contains so many unexplained gaps. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies not in Bay's death itself, but in what followed. His monument ceased. His unfinished tomb was abandoned. His political network seems to vanish almost instantly. For a man who had stood at the very center of Egyptian government, the silence is remarkable. Was his removal so complete that even loyal supporters feared preserving his memory? Or had his influence always depended entirely upon royal favor, disappearing the moment that favor ended? Ancient Egypt offers numerous examples of officials falling dramatically from power. Royal service brought immense privilege. It also carried enormous risk. A single accusation, whether justified or false, could erase decades of achievement. Even names carved into stone were not immune. Several monuments associated with Bey were altered after his death. Some inscriptions were damaged. Others simply disappeared from later historical traditions. Whether this reflected deliberate condemnation or routine political revision remains debated. The distinction matters. If Bey was officially declared an enemy of the state, systematic erasure would have reinforced royal justice. If, however, later governments merely wished to simplify an already chaotic succession, his disappearance may have been administrative rather than ideological. Either explanation reveals how fragile historical memory could become. Ironically, the discovery of the ostracon restored Bey to history. Before its excavation, many scholars misunderstood the final years of Siptah's reign. One small fragment of limestone overturned decades of accepted interpretation. It serves as a powerful reminder that archaeology rarely provides complete narratives. Instead, it offers isolated pieces of an enormous puzzle. Every new discovery forces old assumptions to be reconsidered. Every missing inscription leaves room for multiple possibilities. Even today, researchers continue examining administrative papyri, unfinished tombs, damaged monuments, and overlooked artifacts from the late 19th dynasty, hoping another forgotten record may one day explain why one of Egypt's most influential officials suddenly became a condemned man. Until such evidence emerges, Chancellor Bay remains suspended between two identities: loyal servant who faithfully secured a fragile throne, or ambitious statesman whose power eventually frightened the very monarchy he helped preserve. Somewhere beneath the sands of Egypt, perhaps within an unopened tomb or an undiscovered archive, the missing chapter of his story may still survive, waiting for the moment when history finally reveals whether his execution was an act of justice, political necessity, or something far more complicated. As Chancellor Bay's mysterious downfall disappears into the silence of forgotten court records, another question emerges from an even earlier chapter of Egyptian history. Once again, a kingdom faced uncertainty. Once again, powerful officials stood close to the throne. And once again, the identity of the next pharaoh remains one of ancient Egypt's most enduring political mysteries. The entrance to the tomb is almost hidden beneath the golden cliffs of the Valley of the Kings. Its walls are decorated with scenes of divine rebirth, where gods extend symbols of life toward an aging ruler whose reign was destined to be brief. The paintings remain vivid even after more than 3,000 years. Yet, despite the beauty surrounding them, something feels strangely out of place. This tomb belongs to A, one of Egypt's most unexpected pharaohs, a man who reached the throne not as a young prince, celebrated military hero, or obvious heir, but as an elderly court official whose path to kingship remains surprisingly difficult to explain. Standing within these chambers, it is easy to wonder whether A had always imagined becoming pharaoh, or whether history simply placed him at the center of events that no one could control. His rise came during one of the most turbulent periods in Egyptian history. Only a few years earlier, Pharaoh Akhenaten had transformed Egypt in ways that challenged centuries of religious tradition. Temples dedicated to ancient gods were abandoned. The worship of Aten, represented by the solar disk, became the focus of royal devotion. The capital itself moved to a newly constructed city, today known as Amarna. These dramatic reforms reshaped religion, politics, and society, leaving divisions that would outlast Akhenaten himself. When the young Tutankhamun eventually became king, many of those changes began to reverse. Traditional temples reopened. The old gods returned to official worship. Royal inscriptions once again honored Amun and the wider Egyptian pantheon. Yet, Tutankhamun himself ruled only briefly. His sudden death, probably around the age of 19, created an enormous problem. There was no clear surviving heir. The royal line, already weakened by years of political upheaval, now faced another uncertain succession. Into that uncertainty stepped A. At first glance, his qualifications appear impressive. He held one of the highest offices in the kingdom, carrying titles such as God's Father, fan-bearer on the right side of the king, and senior advisor within the royal court. Throughout both the Amarna period and Tutankhamun's reign, A occupied positions close to the center of power. His experience was undeniable. He had served under multiple rulers. He understood palace administration. He possessed religious authority. Most importantly, he remained alive during a moment when many members of the royal family had already died. From one perspective, his accession appears entirely practical. Egypt required stability. An experienced administrator offered continuity while the kingdom recovered from decades of political disruption. Many Egyptologists regard I's reign in precisely these terms. He may simply have been the most qualified individual available. Yet, the surviving evidence leaves room for deeper questions. Who exactly was I before becoming king? His origins remain surprisingly uncertain. Some scholars believe he came from Akhmim in Upper Egypt, where influential families produced many important officials. Others suggest he may have belonged to the extended royal family long before ascending the throne. One particularly intriguing possibility concerns Queen Tiye, the powerful wife of Amenhotep III and grandmother of Tutankhamun. Some researchers have proposed that A was related to Tiye, perhaps even her brother. If true, this would make A close relative of the royal bloodline, giving him stronger dynastic legitimacy than his titles alone might suggest. The evidence, however, remains indirect. No surviving inscription explicitly confirms such a relationship. Names, family connections, and titles provide clues, but not certainty. As with so many mysteries of ancient Egypt, the available pieces refuse to form a complete picture. Another puzzle surrounds I's wife, Te. She carried the title Nurse of the Great Royal Wife. Many historians believe this refers to Nefertiti, suggesting that A's household stood extraordinarily close to Egypt's most influential royal family during the Amarna period. If A helped raise or supervise members of the royal household, his political influence may have stretched back decades before his own reign. But influence alone does not automatically produce kingship. The most remarkable evidence for I's accession appears inside the tomb of Tutankhamun. Among the famous burial scenes is an image unlike any other. It depicts A performing the opening of the mouth ceremony for the deceased king. This ritual held profound religious importance. Ordinarily, it was performed by the successor to the throne, symbolically restoring the dead king's senses for eternal life. The image therefore carries enormous political significance. It publicly presents A as Tutankhamun's legitimate successor. Was the scene simply documenting established tradition, or was it carefully designed to reinforce a claim that many might have questioned? The distinction matters. Images in royal tombs rarely functioned as simple historical records. They communicated legitimacy, divine approval, and political authority. Every figure, gesture, and inscription served multiple purposes. I's presence beside Tutankhamun may therefore reveal both religious duty and calculated political messaging. Another mystery emerges from events beyond Egypt itself. Among the diplomatic archives of the Hittite Empire survives one of the ancient world's most extraordinary royal letters. A widowed Egyptian queen, identified by modern historians as Dakhamunzu, a title rather than a personal name, wrote to the Hittite king requesting one of his sons as her husband. Her message expressed desperation. She claimed to have no son. She insisted she would never marry one of her own servants. Instead, she requested a foreign prince to become Egypt's next king. The Hittite king was reportedly astonished. Such a proposal had no known precedent. After lengthy correspondence, he finally agreed to send Prince Zannanza. The prince never arrived. Somewhere on the journey into Egypt, he was killed. The circumstances remain unknown. The Hittites blamed the Egyptian court. Egyptian records remain silent. Modern historians continue debating who benefited from his death. Among the possible beneficiaries stood Ai. If the widowed queen truly wished to avoid marrying one of Egypt's own officials, and if Ai eventually married her after Tutankhamun's death, as some evidence suggests, then the failed diplomatic mission becomes deeply significant. Was Ai merely the fortunate survivor of an unfolding crisis? Or did powerful factions within Egypt ensure that no foreign prince would ever reach the throne? No surviving document provides the answer. The queen's identity itself remains debated. Many scholars identify her as Akhenaten, Tutankhamun's widow. Others remain cautious, pointing to unresolved chronological problems. Without certainty regarding the queen, certainty regarding Ai's role becomes equally difficult. Another important figure complicates the story. General Horemheb. Commander of Egypt's military, Horemheb possessed considerable authority and substantial experience. Before Tutankhamun's death, he had already been designated as an important royal official, perhaps even intended as successor under certain circumstances. Yet, when Tutankhamun died, Horemheb did not immediately become king. Instead, Ai ascended the throne. Why? Some historians believe Horemheb may have been absent on military campaigns. Others argue that Ai, already controlling the royal court and religious administration, simply acted more quickly. Still others suggest negotiations between competing political factions determined the outcome. Whatever occurred behind palace walls has disappeared from surviving records. Interestingly, Horemheb eventually succeeded Ai after the older king's relatively short reign. Once in power, Horemheb initiated widespread restoration projects while also reshaping Egypt's official historical memory. Several rulers associated with the Amarna period, including Akhenaten, Smenkhkare, Tutankhamun, and Ai, received diminished attention within later king lists. Whether this represented religious reform, political necessity, or deliberate historical revision continues to be debated. If Ai's legitimacy had been universally accepted, why did later rulers appear so eager to minimize his place within royal history? Perhaps the answer lies in Egypt's desire to distance itself from the turbulent legacy of the Amarna years. Or perhaps deeper political conflicts remained hidden beneath official inscriptions. More speculative theories have naturally emerged over time. Some suggest Ai secretly orchestrated Tutankhamun's succession decades earlier, patiently positioning himself for eventual kingship. Others wonder whether he played a role in events surrounding the young king's unexpected death. Still others imagine complex alliances involving priests, military leaders, and royal family members, each maneuvering quietly as Egypt's future hung in the balance. None of these theories enjoys definitive archaeological support. Tutankhamun's death itself remains the subject of ongoing medical and historical investigation. No evidence conclusively links Ai to any wrongdoing. Yet the combination of sudden opportunity, political experience, and unanswered questions continues to inspire speculation. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether A sought power, but whether power sought him. He was already elderly when crowned. His reign lasted only a few years. He invested in traditional religious restoration rather than radical transformation. His monuments emphasize continuity, legitimacy, and devotion to Egypt's ancient gods. These are not necessarily the actions of an ambitious revolutionary. They may instead reflect a statesman attempting to steady a kingdom after decades of uncertainty. Or perhaps they represent the careful public image of a ruler who understood that appearances mattered as much as reality. Today, visitors walking through A's tomb encounter beautiful paintings, carefully carved hieroglyphs, and scenes promising eternal life. Yet, beneath those colorful walls lingers a quieter mystery that no inscription fully resolves. Why was this aging courtier chosen to wear the double crown when younger military leaders and members of the royal family still existed? Was his accession the natural result of experience, family connections, and political necessity? Or did hidden negotiations within the royal palace shape a future that official history never recorded? Somewhere between the surviving monuments and the silences that surround them, the true story of A's rise may still remain buried, waiting beneath Egypt's sands for a discovery that has yet to be made.